Farming is a complex business. We all face challenges around prices, around seasonal conditions and around input costs. So how do we make decisions given that uncertainty? Because to make good decisions is the only way we can run an efficient, profitable and sustainable farm business. Hi, I'm Cam Nicholson. I'm a consultant and a farmer near Geelong in Victoria, and this short video is around how to enhance your decision-making skills. It has been funded by the Queensland Government Reef Water Quality Program with support from the Burnett Mary Regional Group and the Burnett Catchment Care Association. Just because we make decisions all the time doesn't mean we're good at making them. This comment made to me by a farmer in Western Australia got me thinking. You make a lot of decisions. Some of them are really simple, some of them are more demanding. But when were you taught to make a good decision? In the same way that you were taught how to read, how to write and do arithmetic. Decision making is a skill. It can be learnt, it can be practiced. And the more you do it, the more you can become a confident decision maker. In this video, I'll be showing you a process that I use that helps my decision making. But before we do, we need to cover off on some theory, so it's back to the classroom. I'm going to briefly touch on a few critical things around decision making. The first is a difference between a good and right decision. We all want to make the right decision, but in farming we often need to make choices before the dice is rolled. So the best we can hope for is a good decision. And a good decision in my mind are ones that are informed and considered. With complex decisions, rarely is there only one thing to consider. Commonly, we have multiple factors to weigh up. These factors can be positive or negative, or if you like, the pros and cons of a decision. Not all pros and cons are of equal importance or weighting. Some are more important than others. So we need to find a way to compare these pros and cons so we can make a decision on balance. The identification and weighting of these multiple factors are often based on facts, but also on your values, beliefs, biases and preferences, as well as your intuition and your experience. This is referred to as the head, heart and gut of decision making. We all vary in how much the head, heart and gut influence our decisions. Some people just want to stick to the facts, others rely more heavily on their instinct and gut feel. Some make decisions because they just believe it's the right thing to do. With complex decisions, and many of those are complex in farming, all perspectives are valid, the head, the heart and the gut. Finally, we think differently about each factor identified depending on the likelihood of them occurring. In other words, our decisions are influenced by the odds or the chances of different results. This is where risk comes into our decisions. For example, if price was a consideration in your decision, then you might think differently in your decision if prices were forecast to go well above historic average or well below historic average. So how do we put this theory into practice? I'd like to share with you a simple process that I use that brings the theory to life. It's called a decision matrix, and I first saw it from South Australian farmer and consultant Barry Mudge. Developing a decision matrix has a number of steps. I'm going to use an example created by a group of farmers in southern Queensland after experiencing a poor wet season to illustrate how we approach developing a decision matrix. The first step is clearly defining the decision. This might sound odd, but unless we know what the decision is, it's hard to identify the critical factors to consider. In this example, it was to do with, do I sell cattle or not? The second step, which is optional, is to define when the decision needs to be made. I call this the trigger point, and I find it useful when we have recurring decisions. In this example, it is May after the end of the wet season. The next step is to identify the critical factors we should weigh up in making this decision. For example, it could be things like body condition score, the feed available, water available for stock, the rainfall forecast, etc. Your head, heart and gut will inform these critical factors. In this example, 6 critical factors are identified. Step 4. This requires taking each critical factor in turn and asking, when would I think differently about this factor? For example, if we take the critical factor of body condition score, then we may think differently about our decision if the animals are in condition score 5 or condition score 1 or 2. A trick I use to help define when I think differently is to imagine the most favourable possibility within reason and the least favourable. These then become the bookends of our description. I then add any middle descriptions if required. We do this for each of the critical considerations. Once again, your head, heart, and gut will inform these descriptions. When this step was completed, the group came up with the following. The descriptions do not have to be numbers. Words will do as long as they define points where you would think differently about the decision. If you like numbers, you'd replace, say, the feed available description, in this example, with kilograms of dry matter per hectare. Step 5 involves assigning scores to the descriptions. This enables the relative weighting referred to in the theory to be included. I use 2 tricks here. First, I start by assigning all the least favourable descriptions 0. Then assign values to the most favourable descriptions in each critical factor, but importantly, relative to the other most favourable descriptions. This bookends the scoring, then complete the middle values if needed. In this example, the group valued feed available slightly more important with a score of 8 than body condition score or water for stock, which both had a score of 6. The completed scoring by this group was like this. Now you might disagree with the critical factors identified, the condition descriptions, and all the scores. That's fine, you just change them. Remember, the matrix is about giving you a process to follow. It's not about the right answer everyone must apply. You need to own the decision, so you need to be comfortable with the choices in the decision matrix. The second last step is to describe what decision you'd make on balance. Adopting the same trick I use in assigning the scores, I read out the most favourable descriptions for all the critical factors and then think, what decision would I make? So using this example, what if the animals were in condition score 5? There was dust behind the dog because it was so dry. There's no stock water. The rainfall forecast is for decile 1 to 3. Soil's so dry you can drive a bulldozer over it. And you'd have absolutely no worries about selling. I'm guessing you'd probably sell aggressively because you've got fat animals, poor feed and water prospects ahead. I then do the same for the least favourable description. What if the animals are only in condition score 1 or 2, but you can't see the dog because you've got so much feed, you've got plenty of stock water, it's a decile 7 to 9 forecast, and in fact the soil's that wet you'd bog a horse if you rode over it. But if you tried to sell, you'd encounter selling constraints due to the animal condition. I'm guessing you'd hang on to them because you've got skinny animals and you've got plenty of feed and water in the future. This bookends your decision. You then add any decisions between those 2 bookends. There may be none if you feel there are only 2 choices. In this example, the group came up with some colourful decision descriptions and 5 decision points. The final step is to assign scores to the different decisions you have described. To do this, add up the maximum scores under the most favourable description. In this case, it is 31. You assign preliminary values compared to the maximum of 31 and test the suggested decisions under different scenarios. These scenarios that I find useful may be past examples when you can reflect on a known outcome. For example, in the past, let's say if we had a combination of animals that were in condition score 3, we had limited feed, but the water was okay, etc., and you go through those 6, then in hindsight, what should we have done? Should we have sold more aggressively, or should we have hung on to more stock, or so on? Then check, does the decision support the actual decision that should have been made in hindsight? If not, you either adjust the values in the matrix or the score in the decision table. There's no formula to decide what those scores should be. It'll be different for different people, based on your personality, the amount of risk you want to take on, and so forth. Best thing to do though is just put some scores down, test those with different scenarios, and then adjust accordingly. Here's another example of a decision around late season application of nitrogen in a crop. A couple of things to highlight in looking at this example. Firstly, the condition descriptions can be fairly simple. In this case here, current nitrogen status is just low, medium and high. Secondly, to make the decision, clearly you need some information and also skills potentially in some of these things. For example, to determine the current soil moisture, you need to either have some tools or technologies there, whether it's something simple as a push rod or whether it's a moisture probe that you might be using. If you had to do things like estimate the crop yield potential, then there's obviously a skill being able to examine heads and being able to do a calculation thinking what's the potential yield of this crop and so on. The matrix will help define what information and skills you need rather than being overwhelmed with too much information that you don't know what to do with. There are many instances where the decision matrix can be used, whether that's for things like buying or selling stock, putting nitrogen on crops, or even big things like buying or selling land. What's important though is that the decision process has got to be dynamic. It's not set in stone, it's not fixed. It can and should be modified as we learn new things, as we experience new things, and we reflect on past decisions. The more you use the decision matrix, the more it'll become second nature. I trust you've got something out of this short video on decision making, which I believe has got a fair bit of merit. Additional resources are currently being prepared and will be available in the near future. But to stay in contact or obtain other resources, refer to the information on the slide.